once again um, to what is, I believe, our third installment of this study, the 100 Verses of Advice. One thing I thought to just state here, which could possibly be stating the obvious, but then again, what we're looking at here with these verses of advice is what we call pith instruction. So they don't come with a whole lot of extensive logical reasoning. This really presumes some, you could say, familiarity with the path, and you could say a corresponding humble recognition that knows our own disposition and, you could say, potential for self-deceit, even superficiality. And this is where the pith instruction addresses us very much where you could say there's a raw nerve of truth. So that's where it really requires that there's a great deal of openness. For example, today, there will be a lot of very accurate observations. Tonight we'll have a lot of, you could say, very accurate observations around death. And this, of course, is where we could say, hey, I know this. I don't want to hear about it. Or, yeah, so what? So the point here is we'd want to acknowledge that we tend to suppress or ignore certain truths about impermanence. And on that account, you could say we then tend to miss some essential perspectives, really, in our choices. So here we're being reminded, of course, it does make a difference who it is who's reminding. And so what we have here are two very, what we could call august masters, who we presumably respect and see that they're not just making trivial statements, but what they're saying here really comes from a perspective of vast wisdom and compassion. So with that motivation, then we'd want to appreciate then what's being said here. Last time I missed stanza 16, so I just want to go over that. And it reads, the very thing you feel attached to, let go of it. Whatever. People of Tingri, there isn't anything you need. So we look into what is real, we analyze anything that we're attached to, and we get clear about it. We empower ourselves when we emerge from such dependency. Sustaining simplicity and contentment through focus, we accomplish the two benefits, that of self and other. So with these, if the sages of the past did these reflections, then how much more are they important for persons like ourselves? So we can look at anything that we're profoundly attached to, and we then look straight into its ultimate lack of essence. This could be objects, people, whatever. We see the complexity and the lack of essence, what we call the unity of dependent arising and emptiness. Now, the radical truthfulness like this is essential unless we want to continue deceiving ourselves and suffering as a result. When we see how things are really illusions, we can have then the confidence, I don't need anything. If, however, we disempower ourselves by living in dependency on having these things, or living in fear of other, you could say, situations or objects or whatever, then our lives go on becoming continually tormented. So particularly when we have strong attachment, we could very well end up being reborn, embodying this poverty spirit as what we call a hungry ghost. So if we look at the lives of the sages of the past, they were really examples of contentment, content with just enough food or just enough clothes. Even we look at sages that might have had ostensibly a lot of wealth and so forth, this didn't come about through them greedily attaching themselves to it. It just came to them. They enjoyed it without any attachment. So these persons are not romantics or fascinated. Now here we're talking about then the hermit style, but that particular lifestyle is not a romantic sort of dreamy world or comes from some fascination with simple pleasures or simple lifestyle, but it's rather the choice of practical persons who got their priorities right, focusing on what is important for themselves and ultimately for the community at large. Sages don't choose, you could say, hermitages as sort of an ultimate. It's really just a temporary measure in order to achieve the goal of enlightenment. And ultimately, that is achieved with the larger community in mind. So we have then stories like that of Karagomchong, which we also find in Words of My Perfect Teacher, who are really great examples of the kind of focus we require and how to die without regret. So this is not about idolizing these people, it's telling us how to do it. And the sense is, if these great yogis prioritize like that, yogis who presumably had some ability to integrate perceptions in their practice, how more is this kind of effort and focus required for persons like ourselves who might not be that skilled in integrating phenomena in our practice? So it's not as if these yogis were attached or predisposed for that sort of lifestyle. Um, they just did what they needed to do. So it's just like our own health. We each need to do what is required. It doesn't help that we admire people who are healthy. It applies that we each need to take the um, prerequisite steps ourselves. Okay, then we go to where we arrived at last time. In the narrow defiles of birth, death, and the intermediate state, bandits await the 5 poisonous emotions, sure to ambush you. People of Tingri, avail yourselves of the teacher as your escort. So the bullets read, if unprepared, the 5 poisons will ambush our journey on the path. The teacher can escort us and protect us. The protection lies in our confidence in the teacher, hearing his advice, our practice and application of the advice. Such preparation removes obstacles and ensures swift progress. So the path is not exactly what we could perceive as a beautiful sort of or a walk in a beautiful park where we pick flowers. The path is about facing our raw material, which includes the 5 styles of neurosis or the 5 destructive emotions. So our practice is to face these styles of emotion, neurosis, and we deal with them according to our particular level of practice. We should not be overcome by them because these are, as it were, bandits or muggers robbing us of our wealth, experience, and realization. If we get run over by these habitual patterns, then our practice suffers. Kyabje Dilgo Khyentse, he says, the 5 poisonous emotions are merciless marauders who will not have the slightest hesitation in killing your chance of reaching your destination, freedom from samsara. So it's not as if we are expected to be able to figure this out ourselves, and this is where we then have guidance of someone who is not only educated and has information, but someone who truly has experience. So such a person is regarded as a powerful escort, and he or she is able to effectively protect us with their know-how, their advice, and above all, you could say their example, their presence, and this ensures that we arrive safe and sound. But this again requires that we find a fully qualified teacher, and we need then to, one, establish confidence in him or her. We need to properly hear their teaching, and three, we need to put these teachings into practice. So with these three, it is possible to progress without obstacles. Kyabje Dilgo Khyentse says, thanks to the kindness and wisdom of the spiritual teacher, the whole of the Dharma is available to you, set out like a display of sumptuous foods in the marketplace. Would it not be foolish of you to miss this chance? End of quote. So with this, or with these preparations, able to, you could say, ward off obstacles and turn them into really factors that enhance our practice, then it's possible then to face both life as well as death with resolute confidence. Your never-failing source of refuge is the teacher. People of Tingri, carry him constantly on the crown of your head. Relying on the teacher is the swift path. We serve the teacher through offering 1. Material objects, 2. Service, and 3. The best, practice. We listen to the teacher's guidance, identify the relevance of the guidance, and we integrate it through practice. We should practice with vigor, without conceit. We should integrate devotion in all circumstances. So this is an extensive topic, really, and this is what we sometimes refer to as Guru Yoga. So, what of course we're doing here is we're invoking the teacher. Now, the teacher is ultimately understood as being our innate wisdom. There just needs to be what Gambopa refers to as the condition that enables us to identify that. This is in the Jewel Ornament Liberation. There's a whole chapter to that where we talk about the basis is our Buddha nature, but the condition for unveiling this nature is the teacher. So we could say that the practice could resemble theism. However, the view is hugely different, as we here see the teacher as ultimately our Buddha nature. So while we relatively have a teacher, this teacher is continually pointing to this ultimate dispositions that's innate to us. So the teacher is not externalized, and particularly in the Vajrayana, where we see the teacher as Vajradhara, we then view the teacher as the outer manifestation of this unconditional, innate disposition of Buddha nature. We might think of the teacher in terms of the Niyamanakaya form of the human manifestation that compassionately guides us. And so when we invoke the teacher, we generally tend to think of the teacher as this person we've met. But with the recognition of what this principle really consists of, both on an external and internal level, we can have trust and faith in this constant principle. And the degree to which we have this faith deeply integrated in our experience, the swifter our spiritual development. We could externalize the person as a regular person, but that will touch us only in a very superficial way. To sustain the radical perception of the teacher as the outer manifestation of our Buddha nature, as a true Buddha, touches us much deeper. Some of us, or some of you may have heard, often it's said that if we see the teacher as an ordinary person, we get blessings accordingly as an ordinary person. If we see the teacher as a bodhisattva, we get the blessings of a bodhisattva. And if we see the teacher as a Buddha, we get the blessings of a Buddha. Now, in approaching and serving such a teacher, you could say gauging the nature of the teacher and so forth, we do so through various forms of offering. So it's fine to do material offerings, but it's even better if we can actually serve the teacher with body, speech, and mind. And even better is if we can actually put the teachings into practice with great endeavor or vigor. So we do this listening to the teachings. We apply introspection, seeing how these teachings apply in terms of our personal experience and situation. And finally, we apply the meaning through meditation practice. This is what is referred to as the three prajnas of hearing, reflecting, and meditating. It's said that when we practice, we should be like a hungry yak that cannot get enough and who is constantly looking as it's munching on a mouthful of grass. It's constantly looking to see where is there more. If you read the Ayukandro's life story, I can't remember if I mentioned this before, otherwise I'll upload this, but this is an extremely inspiring life story. You can see how this perfectly is reflected in her life and her constant application of the practice, pursuing study whenever she could, pursuing practice whenever there was possibility. So such enthusiasm or vigor has no laziness or no sort of joyless application. Practice could lead to arrogance and righteousness. So it's helpful to have an actual living teacher that can, you could say, take us down a few notches perhaps, or sometimes give us encouragement, but to have that guidance. There are ways to integrate devotion and the teacher's presence, and this includes, for example, seeing all positive and negative experiences as a teaching of the teacher or the teacher's blessings. Also, it's said that when we fall ill, we can see this as purification. Kyabje Dilgo Khyentse says, if you fall ill, visualize your teacher wherever it is in your body that you feel pain, or that is the site of the disease. Recognize that this illness and pain offers you an opportunity to purify yourself of harmful past actions and of ignorance, which are the sources of suffering. Keep in mind the many other beings who are suffering in the same way as you are, and pray that your suffering may absorb theirs, and that they may be liberated from all suffering. In this way, illness can teach us compassion. So this is how we integrate then devotion in all circumstances. You also have teachings such as visualizing the teacher in your heart, or the various ways of invoking the presence of the teacher. If your protection is the teacher, you'll reach wherever you aspire to go. People of Tingri, cultivate devotion as the fare you pay for the journey. Again, the teacher embodies the unconditional wisdom that is the ground of our journey. The teacher pulls us out of the river of confusion and suffering. The openness of devotion is essential for our journey to enlightenment. We can never conceptualize or know enlightenment intellectually, but we can see it indicated how it is alive through our teacher, which is far more than any conceptual object or dry information can provide us. Seeing our teacher touches on the deepest levels of our being. So the teacher is more than an external person, and so we say the teacher is with us until enlightenment. Being sensitive to the teacher and allowing ourselves to be deeply touched by an appreciation of the teacher's qualities is what we call blessing. And this is far swifter as a way of opening up to our innate wisdom than endless study and gradual thinning out of confusion through ordinary practice or ordinary meditation practice. You could say we are held by the teacher. Just like a person standing on firm ground can help a drowning person who is being swept away by a river current. Similarly, the teacher can pull us out of rounds of confusion and rebirth. It doesn't matter if we're a beginner or a sublime person, we need an authentic teacher. To have the openness that comes through devotion is essential for this journey. Those who get wealthy get miserly too. People of Tingri give generously without being partial. Um, we have two bullets there. The first is as part of my template. It should have been deleted. So the bullets are: miserliness enhances our poverty mentality and leads to corresponding experiences. We should use our wealth to give and do so without partiality. So Tibetans, they have this saying, Khyentse he quotes then saying, the richer people get, the more miserly they are. And we also have similar sayings in the West. Stinginess makes us unhappy and leads to increasing degrees of psychological poverty. Actually, there is a saying by Churchill where he said, we make a living by what we get, but we make a life by what we give. And Kyabje Dilgo Khyentse then advises us, rather than store useless riches, use them in a constructive way. Be generous towards those in need, build stupas, and make offerings to the three jewels. The more generous you are, the more you will prosper. So we should be equal in our generosity, not favoring some above others. Whoever gets power acts sinfully too. People of Tingri abandon all desire for rank and power. Powerful positions often entail suffering for others. Why would we thirst for power when it only brings suffering? High ranks ultimately lead to downfall. The only unchanging position is the awakened state. So I remember as a kid reading Mario Puzo's what was it called? Yeah, the Mafia, right? No, The Godfather. And I remember on the opening page it said something like, behind every great fortune there's a great crime. And also the Tibetans, they say Gangla Wang Yu Dik Yu, which means wherever there's power, there is evil action or there's crime. Now, it's of course tricky to talk about what actual actions lead to. And in fact, the Buddha, he discouraged ordinary individuals speculating about karma, trying to understand what was a particular cause for a result and so on. And clearly, karma is always complex. But there are, of course, measures that we can take to avoid putting ourselves in situations that entail destructive actions, future suffering. And such you could say reflect, or rather such you could say wisdom that you could say informs us about what negative actions could come about, is when we're recognizing how hankering for positions of power inevitably brings suffering to others. It's very often that when we are powerful, then it's on the basis of, you could say, surpassing others in terms of hierarchies and so forth, or maybe exploiting others in terms of commerce and so forth. Also, if we look at heads of state, then they're continually having to pass laws or sort of preventive measures that lead to difficulties for some individuals. Leaders of armies, they have to actually kill, and Khyentse says that very often he says that, and this is presumably from the sutras, that heads of armies actually suffer the results of all the killing that has been done in the context of a war or a battle. So this brings about the question, what is the point? Why this thirst for power when it ultimately only brings suffering? And here we'd want to recognize that the only unchanging position that we could ever attain is enlightenment. Those with rank and riches are never happy and at ease. People of Tingri, get ready to claw at your chest in anguish. Meaning, if you think that rank and riches is going to bring you happiness and ease, then you might end up clawing at your chest in regret at the time of death. Obsessed with money making, there is constant fear and exhaustion. There is rarely a moment of respite. So rather, don't burden yourself with such futile activity and enjoy simplicity. Live in harmony with Dharma. Be the master of your destiny. In our modern world, especially for those who appreciate the Buddhist values, yes, we have some, you could say, conventions about how it's unnecessary to stress over business, fearing loss, and so on, living with this hope for profit. So you could say among Buddhists, that's very much a given. And it was sort of part of the generation that some of us grew up in. Whereas sort of the baby boomer generation had that luxury to say, oh yeah, let's not stress over business. Actually, younger generations don't really have that luxury. So there's a whole different, you could say, trend. But trend or not, the truth remains really that if we are continually pursuing one-pointedly this pursuing wealth and so on, then inevitably it brings about lack of ease. And Khyentse emphasizes how people who are caught up in this, they will never enjoy a carefree, untroubled moment, or very few. And he says, quote, "What a simple joy it is not to have power, nor position in society, and to have nothing to lose and nothing to fear. Do not encumber your mind with useless thoughts. What good is it to brood over the past and fret about the future? Dwell in the simplicity of the present moment. Live in harmony with the Dharma. Make it the heart of your life and experience. Be the master of your destiny. Don't end up clawing your chest in despair at the moment of death." End of quote. Now, when we hear something like that, we might be inspired, but we might also think, oh, I can't do this, or rather, even though I want to do it, I don't seem to be able to. And this is where we have to remind ourselves again and again, we need to practice meditation. Unless we practice meditation, we could have ever so much wisdom in these books and in these advices. But unless we practice meditation, then these advice, they can become sort of nice thoughts, but they can also sometimes become irritants, thinking, oh, this is so easy to say, but I can't do this. So that's where you could say the provocative nature of these statements, they only really, you could say, achieve their objective if we're also practitioners of meditation. So there has to be the discipline of actual sitting practice for us to really appreciate the value of this. But once we have that, then we have both the space and the strength to actually make intelligent choices about our ambitions and projects and so forth. In the next world, there are neither family nor friends. People of Tingri, place your confidence in the Dharma. Our ordinary concern for our body is futile. All will be left behind. Only our karma follows us, driving us choicelessly. Only refuge is the three jewels. Practicing or not will make all the difference for our future. So for all our attachment to our body, it will be of no use in the conventional sense, as our further journey will be independent of our body and driven by karma. The only thing that will help us is being free from our delusion. It is our delusion that creates the ignorance, the kleshas, the karma. To rid ourselves of that, we need to know how. This is where the Buddha's insight can help. And in helping, the Buddha is unveiling our unconditional, non-deluded innate nature. So it is in relying on the Buddha we acquire the ultimate independence. We rely on the Buddha, his teaching, and the Sangha with confidence as our only reliable guide. So the path begins with us addressing the condition of our illness and results in the cure, which is the bliss of liberation. In traveling the path, we might have hardships, but that is not an issue if we recognize the value of the objective. We look at the hardships Jetsun Milarepa went through, and even so, it's obvious that the outcome was the bliss of liberation, his enlightenment. So when we think of someone like Milarepa, we acknowledge their enlightenment, we rejoice. Whereas when we think of ordinary people, there's just a void left behind where they were and a disposable corpse to get rid of as soon as possible. Where they go on, it's very difficult to say. But unless there's, you could say, the attainment of enlightenment, there's not really any certainty. So the term Dharma has the connotation of remedy, amendment, in the sense of it eliminates imperfection and develops all perfections. What the Dharma achieves will impact all of our future lives. So it's 7 o'clock here. I'll just take a few minutes break to see if there's any questions. So there's a question here. So is the openness that comes from devotion a way of developing bodhicitta? Okay, that question one. Very much, you could say that's where we see bodhicitta as it really is integrated, practically experienced. So our appreciation of the teacher is, you could say, us seeing the possibility of developing bodhicitta. And that makes bodhicitta something very real. If you don't have a close relationship with a living master, how do you develop this devotion? And also possibly bodhicitta. It's very helpful to have met a living teacher. Then again, if we haven't met them, I would say even seeing pictures of them, seeing videos. You can have YouTube clips with great teachers. I was watching a YouTube clip this morning with His Holiness the 17th Karmapa, teaching at University of Wisconsin, and such an impressive presence. See, we might have met teachers who aren't alive anymore, but that actually, you can be in front of a live teacher and you can be sitting daydreaming and not necessarily have that appreciation. So it's not really about seeing someone a few times a year or being with the person all the time. It's really just that we've seen what it looks like, smelled it, and the memory of the teacher is just as real as actually being in the presence of the teacher. So as far as this project of developing bodhicitta, we have some idea just from what is available to us. It's very possible. Then there was a question in regards to stanza 16. We accomplished the two benefits. What are the two benefits? These are the two benefits of what we call self and other, meaning enlightenment accomplishes two benefits. One is our own benefit, no more being confused, and the benefit of benefiting others, that we no longer are inhibited or limited by our confusion. And naturally, the outcome of enlightenment is this continual selfless benefiting of others. Okay. If you wander in distraction, you'll waste the freedoms and advantages of human life. People of Tingri, make a resolute decision now. So we should be clear in determining what is of value. we should not waste any time, like the examples of the sages of the past. So this is, you could say, the quintessential fundamental reflection when it comes to Buddhist meditation. Of course, you could say establishing the view, understanding the theory, understanding, you could say, the um, outlook of Buddhism, all its, you could say, aspects, the science of Buddhism, the nature of Buddhism. That's one thing. But when it comes to practice, then we'd want to practice with this understanding of how unique our present opportunity is. So with a clear mind that understands what is at stake, we should prioritize the practice of Dharma and not waste even a moment. We cannot rely on there being time in the future. Now here we have to go back to what I started off saying in terms of we need to recognize humbly where it is that we have some weaknesses. It's about recognizing how we tend to get distracted. Of course, many of us live in situations where we don't have a cultural precedent for this kind of thing, and it's just not possible. So we can't go off and live in caves. But at the same time, the point really is more to actually have the, you could say, inspiration to integrate wisdom and compassion at every moment. Khyentse Rinpoche, he refers then to the the um, the incident in Milarepa's life when one day this poor deer came charging up the hill and sought refuge at his feet, followed by a ferocious dog, and then finally the owner of the dog, which was a hunter. And the hunter initially thought Milarepa was a rather odd fellow living in a cave, but eventually became deeply impressed with him and became a disciple of his. And Khyentse Rinpoche says we should look at the example of Kiroa Gompo Dorje, who dropped all he had and became an accomplished yogi student of Milarepa. Kyabje Dilgo Khyentse says, do not fall into the trap of hesitation. Focus all your energy and devote yourself to practice without letting any other consideration interfere with that. While you're busy being distracted, the demon of death will catch you. People of Tingri practice from this very moment onwards. So, distracted by what is seemingly important but ultimately pointless, various activities, we miss out. Whenever the thought of practice occurs, practice then. So we become distracted by pointless activities. Again, this doesn't mean we shouldn't work or pay taxes or relate to our families and so on, but it's about, again, continually about doing so, integrating wisdom and compassion. But if we could recognize that we do get carried away, then, and this is not about what we do, but about our mind, our lack of mindfulness and so forth, if we can acknowledge that we are distracted, we want to reflect then, apply some antidote, and this is reflecting how we could very well end up missing this golden opportunity for liberation. If we're overwhelmed and impressed by all these activities and just attends to them, then life slips away very quickly. The point is not to do this. Kyabje Dilgo Khyentse says, do not allow the weight of ordinary preoccupations divert you from the pursuit of Dharma. If the thought of practicing occurs to you one day, start that very day. If it comes one night, start that very night. Whatever the place and the time, do it there and then. When will the demon of death appear? There is no way to tell. People of Tingri, right now, be always on your guard. Death comes with no warning. We should live with awareness of its imminence, meaning that it's always present. Death is something that could happen at any time, and Khyentse Rinpoche, he gives us example about how it will surprise us. And we hear about it happening all the time in the news from our private social circles. So we are very vulnerable. Rinpoche says we should be like a political leader who receives death threats and who then continually is attentive to this possibility. We need to see where it is that we somehow superficially ignore this. And this is why we reflect in this way. This is not for us to become stressed or morose, but it's just to identify that there's a shift that's necessary. And we don't assume that this shift will come about through something physical, like we could have some kind of implant or we could take a pill. The mind at the time of Padampa Sangyé and the mind today still remains with the same, you could say, degree of delusion. So the same, you could say, measures need to be applied, and these measures are applied through what we could call introspection, knowing what's taking place in our mind, and then applying this reflection as an antidote to that. So this is not making a big absolute statement about how to behave, how or how things should be. This is just acknowledging that we are stuck in particular patterns, but this is so workable. That's particularly the message of the Buddha Dharma, is that our minds are workable. So this is training the mind. The day you die, there's no one who will protect you. People of Tingri, be ready to have yourselves alone to count on. So this is advice to very regular people. You saw the picture in the first session of the Chingri village. It's probably pretty much now what it was back then. And wherever we go, we human beings, we're fortunate if we have this kind of advice. So whether we are in Tingli in the 10th century, or we are here in the modernity of the 21st century, these truths, they apply. Nothing can postpone death. Wandering in the bardo, what's that supposed to mean? Well, let's just agree that it says realization will help us. I guess it should say one's or our realization will help us. So now is the time to prepare. So we're going to leave friends, possessions behind powerlessly. There's nothing we can do. So just like all the various bardos that we have, that means this life, after this life, and before the, what do we call, between this life and next life, and what we also call prior to rebirth, these four bardos, they're all mental projections. But even though they are mental projections, they seem solid and hard enough. After dying, the truth is we have no familiar ground. We're frightened, we're hiding, haunted by hallucinations. This is very similar to what happens when we dream. So at this point, only realization and faith in the basic goodness of reality is going to help us. And this requires present applications of the teachings. Just as in times of peace, nations remain armed. Just like farmers with their larders full, they still plan ahead. So likewise, when we see these various teachings on the bardo, they describe how we can attain liberation in the bardo, but it always is essentially, the point is, for that really to be effective, we need to train now. If you reflect on death, there's nothing you will need. People of Tingri, always keep your death in mind. Again, this is not designed to become more morose, but this is designed for us to be aware of this, you could say, inertia that it sits with us, and apply then this mind training. And if you look at people who apply this mind training, then they're very upbeat. As a result, they do something, and they don't need to worry at the time of passing on. It's just like people who um, prepare in time for their taxes. They don't need to worry about the time when it's time to lodge your tax file. So this is always just universally valid that we need to, you could say, identify our sloth, our, you could say, dullness, and do something about it. So, awareness of impermanence and death, it frees us from hankering for this life's affairs. It brings about our aspiration to practice like Jetsun Milarepa. Without that, we get stuck on meaningless obsessions. Great masters of the past were driven by realization of impermanence. Mindfulness of death is a nectar-like medicine. So, if we're aware of impermanence and death, it frees us from our ordinary superficial fascination with this life's affairs, and it brings about doing something valuable like Milarepa and also countless others. If we don't do this, then we remain stuck on a very narrow scope, which is just focused on the projects of this life. And this never brings us satisfaction. We'll end up continually wanting more of this, more of that, more clothes, better places to live, new lovers, etc. But if we remember death, we see how insignificant these things are. Realization of impermanence is what drove the great masters of the past to focus on Dharma practice. The Kadampa masters had something they called the four objectives, or four entrustments. Entrusting one's life to practice, entrusting one's practice to a life in poverty, in entrusting this life in poverty until death, and entrusting such a death to an empty cave. Now this might to us sound radical, but the result is they achieve the bliss of liberation. Again, we're not concerned about the externals here, but more about the implicit message. So it requires that we are far-sighted enough to engage in practice. Rinpoche says, such a far-sighted and profound perspective can take hold within you. It is the result of being constantly mindful of death. Mindfulness of death is a nectar-like medicine that restores you to health and a sentinel that watches over the discipline of your practice, never letting it stray into distractions. Like lengthening shadows as the sun sinks low, the demon of death relentlessly draws nearer. People of Tingri, quickly get away from him. So death is certain, its time uncertain. With death looming, we can never rest. Only Dharma can transform death into something favorable. So we notice how the days quickly draw to an end, and we recognize that death is like that. But there is a big difference, and that is that death comes unexpected, as we know. So we should be, or rather we are, like a hunted criminal, always on the run, always thinking about how to remain free. And this is where this, you could say, incentive to achieve freedom is then our practice of the Dharma. And it's only this which can transform death into something favorable. Actually, this is not just in the history of Buddhism. You also have the story about Saint Francis, who passed away singing. So then the morning's ravishing flower will wither by nightfall. People of Tingri, don't put your hopes in your body. So I'm just going to actually, for this one, I'm just going to read something that Khyentse Rinpoche says, but the points being, we can see impermanence all around. Rather than worry, we should practice now. Practice will bring the satisfaction we seek. So Kyabje Dilgo Khyentse says, the flowers of all sorts of colors that wave in the summer breezes, will they still be there in the blizzards of winter or after the hail? The forests turn from green to gold in autumn, and in winter the branches of all the trees stand out, dark and lifeless. Our bodies, too, grow older and decline day after day. There is nothing we can do about it. The more you are preoccupied by your own physical aging, and the more anxious you will become. Do not worry so much about your physical appearance. Concentrate rather on not wasting your life. Practice the Dharma. The more you engage in it, the more your satisfaction will grow. End of quote. Even if resembling while alive, the children of the gods, once dead, they are more frightful than a demon horde. People of Tingri, you've been deceived by these illusory bodies. So even there are some people who are beautiful. When they pass away, their corpses are disposed of as quickly as possible. Alive, the body in general is agreeable. Once dead, we quickly dispose of it. So, like a craftsman with tools on loan, we should make use of the body right now. We can accomplish the Dharma with this body. So, you inevitably want to get rid of a corpse, however beautiful and agreeable this person was while they're alive, however close they were to you. Rinpoche mentions how in Tibet, once you're dead, you're put in a sack, you're dragged up to a plateau where people will chop you up and feed you to the vultures. In the West, we burn our bodies or we bury them in the ground. So presently, then, we have this body, and what do we want to do is to make it work for us. We should be like a craftsman who has borrowed some really useful tools, putting then this body to the best possible use while we can. Right now, we have this brief opportunity to practice the Dharma and to accomplish deathless wisdom. Visitors to market day, their trading finish, on the morrow have dispersed. People of Tingri, your friends, will part from you, be certain. So this is a quote we often see. I know it's in the words of my perfect teacher. Gatherings come to an end. Busy markets close at night and all is quiet. Happy gatherings of families and friends ends as everyone dies. Everyone departs alone. So Rinpoche says the members of a united family, happy though they may feel when they're all together, will have to cross the threshold of death, one after the other, all alone. End of quote. So we needn't fear death when we take this perspective into an account of our reality. Again, it reminds me of taxes, and it's only a problem if we don't face the reality. So masters who have made the reflection of impermanence the foundation of their practice enjoy simplicity and permanent joy in the present moment. Since this scarecrow, conjured up by magic, is soon to tumble down, people of Tingri, act now according to the linking of effect with cause. As the scarecrow is gradually destroyed by the weather, our bodies too disintegrate. Before frailty seriously hits, we need to practice now the conditions are right. Not following after pointless impulses, we should act now. See how much effort we put into ordinary projects, making great sacrifices. Should we not make such an effort, perhaps even 1,000 times more in the case of our Dharma practice? So, scarecrows, they sit out in the wind and rain, and the conditions that keep them together, straw and a few sort of objects, gradually come undone. Likewise, our aggregates come apart as we grow old. Now that we have the chance, before old age hits us too strongly, we should prioritize our Dharma practice above everything else. While we have countless impulses about inconsequential things that we could do, the thoughts of Dharma are rather rare. So now we have thoughts of Dharma, we should put these into practice, reflecting on them, seeing how this fits with us, reflecting, and meditating. We should be just like farmers who work from dawn to dusk at the time of harvesting, wearing, as Rinpoche says, a hat of stars and wearing a hat of stars and shoes of frost. So now, shouldn't we put in 1,000 times more effort to accomplish enlightenment, the greatest goal of all? For sure, the vulture of your mind will one day fly away. People of Tingri, now is the time to soar up to the heights. So, at the end of life, we need to fly away, soaring on wings of wisdom and compassion. So, as if ever you've witnessed vultures, actually, if you travel in India, several times you come across vultures sitting by the side of the road with some corpse, and as soon as that's devoured, and if I'm not wrong, even, people come by, they quickly just fly away. So there should be no, you could say, attachment. When we end this life, we need to fly off into the bardo. And this is where we want to be equipped with the wings of wisdom and compassion. This will enable us to fearlessly set off to cross the vast precipice of future lives. So this is just very briefly because we here now conclude the reflection on impermanence, and we finish with this assertion that what we need then is the object of our practice, wisdom and compassion. The next one is the beginning then of reflecting on what we call bodhicitta, the wish to establish all sentient beings in freedom and enlightenment. We begin with relative bodhicitta, which is caring for other sentient beings. And here it reads, all beings of the 6 realms have cared for you as parents. People of Tingri, towards them cultivate your love and compassion. We have a limited view on who we are connected with. Yet through countless lifetimes, we have been related to all beings as parents and children. What we need is a good heart. To cultivate that, we view all beings as our parents. We should actively benefit them in every way, temporarily tending to their immediate needs and ultimately tending to their minds through connecting them to the Dharma. The value of our actions cannot be judged from outside. They depend on our inner attitude. So, right now, we think of the others as just those we know. There's some people we like, there's some we dislike, and then there's some we ignore. But sentient beings are infinite, and we're not talking just about humans. And all of these beings, we're connected to them in infinite ways. We've been interacting for a very long time. All of them have at one point cared greatly for us, and we should think of them in these terms, wishing to repay their kindness. For this, we need a great and kind heart. And the way to, again, cultivate this, it's not assume that we just have it naturally, but cultivating it, we do this proactively through focusing on the fact that others have at one point been our parents, looking after us selflessly. This view we need to apply impartially, even applying to those we feel hostility towards. We'd want to help others in 2 ways. Temporarily, we give them what they need, food, clothing, housing, etc. And also we say freedom from fear. And ultimately, we wish to enable them to be free altogether, attain liberation and enlightenment. Now, when we do whatever we do, whenever we act, the true value of what we're doing really lies in our attitude. So we might look like we're doing something wonderful from the outside, but if it's really just to either look good or there's some personal selfish agenda involved, then it's not really more than just the usual kind of self-serving activity, and that's not really what it means to, you could say, benefit others with a kind heart. So we could say the degree of our bodhicitta is the attitude that we bring to any action. Bodhicitta, by definition, is the wish to establish all sentient beings in enlightenment. Relative bodhicitta is the skillful action that accommodates our duality. Um, and this is where we think. Honestly, we do. We think in terms of self and other. So when we practice relative bodhicitta, this is where we do like we are talking about here. We train the mind in generating this kind heart, also what we call the four boundless, such as kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and impartiality. And then we have what's called absolute bodhicitta, which is, you could say, free from any conceptual reference point, any objectification, any kind of duality. And in that we relinquish the fixation on self and others. So this is what we do through sitting practice. This dissolves dualistic fixation. Effectively, we have two, you could say, modalities of meditation on absolute bodhicitta and post-meditation practice of relative bodhicitta. Anyway, that is, I think, where we'll stop today. And I'll just see if there's any more questions. This is interesting. This is a follow-up to the previous question about what is meant with the two benefits, where I said the two benefits are benefiting self and other. And yes, that is actually also related to wisdom and compassion. We say the Buddha achieves freedom from samsara through wisdom and achieves freedom from nirvana through compassion. So the Buddha doesn't dwell in the peace of nirvana or in the confusion of samsara. But yes, these are the two aspects of enlightenment, when we have the insight that knows reality and the compassion that cares for others. Okay, that seems to be the end of the questions. So for next time, please read the next 20 stanzas, and we'll continue our discussion here, initially with regards to bodhicitta. By this merit may all attain omniscience, may defeat the enemy wrongdoing, from the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may all beings be freed. May bodhicitta, precious and sublime, arise where it has not yet come to be, and where it has arisen, may it never fail, but grow and flourish ever more and more. So, thank you very much. Good night.